The fire didn't just take my house. It took the memories that made me me. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still hear the crackle, that hungry sound of something eating everything you've ever loved. I can still smell the smoke, thick and choking, mixing with the scent of old photo albums and wood polish. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the night, I see it again. The porch where Robert and I used to sit after dinner, glowing orange as the flames swallowed it whole. If you've ever lost everything in one night, you'll understand when I say only time stops. Nothing makes sense anymore. That was the night I learned what it truly means to be alone. When the fire trucks pulled away, I stood on the curb with nothing but my purse and the clothes on my back. The night air was cold, heavy with the smell of burnt wood and chemicals. My neighbors had gone back inside their homes, whispering through closed curtains, grateful it wasn't them. Mrs. Jenkins, dear, sweet Mrs. Jenkins, stayed by my side. She wrapped me in a blanket someone had fetched from their car and kept patting my shoulder like she was afraid I might crumble. "Oh, Grace, honey. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I nodded, but no words came out. My throat was too dry, my mind too numb. Everything I'd built with Robert, gone. 42 years of living, loving, and growing together, erased in under an hour. They said it started from an outlet in the living room. Old wiring, nothing I could have done. But still, I couldn't help thinking, if only I'd checked the smoke alarm. If only I'd noticed the smell sooner. Guilt burns almost as bad as fire. The Red Cross came that night, offering water bottles, sandwiches, and pamphlets full of numbers I didn't have the strength to call. One of them offered me a cot in a community gym. The thought of sleeping beside strangers in a room that echoed with loss made my skin crawl. Mrs. Jenkins insisted I come stay with her, but she had her grandkids visiting. Her small apartment was already overflowing with toys and tiny socks hanging from every chair. I didn't want to be in the way, so I stood there a while longer, staring at the smoking skeleton of the place I'd called home. And when I couldn't stand anymore, I did the only thing that made sense. I called my son, David, my only child. I used Mrs. Jenkins' phone since mine had melted right on the kitchen counter. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold it steady. He answered on the third ring. "Mom, everything okay?" Just hearing his voice nearly broke me. "There was a fire," I said. "The house is gone." There was a pause, a long one. I imagined him sitting there in his perfect suburban kitchen, his hand frozen over his coffee mug, unsure what to say. "Were you hurt?" he finally asked. "No, baby, I'm fine. But I don't have anywhere to go. Can I come stay with you for a little while? Just until I figure things out." Another pause. This one shorter. "Of course, Mom, come on over. We'll work it out." And just like that, the dam inside me cracked. I thanked him a dozen times before hanging up, tears streaming down my smoke-streaked cheeks. My boy. My David. He was going to help me. Despite the distance that had grown between us, the missed birthdays, the awkward phone calls, he was still my son. Still the boy who used to crawl into my lap after a nightmare. I clung to that thought like it was a life raft. The next morning, I stood in front of the ruins once more. Everything was black and silent. You never realize how many sounds a home makes until it's gone. The hum of the fridge, the ticking of the wall clock, the creak of the front steps. The silence after is unbearable. A young insurance adjuster showed up, clipboard in hand, too polite to meet my eyes. He took photos, scribbled notes, and spoke in numbers that made no sense to me. "Total loss," he said almost cheerfully. "But with depreciation and deductible, you'll probably get around 90,000. 90,000. You can't rebuild 40 years of a life for 90,000. Still, I nodded like it was enough, thanked him for coming, and walked away before he could see my tears. Mrs. Jenkins helped me pack the few things that had survived. A melted wristwatch, a singed family photo, my late husband's wedding band that had somehow fallen clear of the wreckage. Everything fit into one small borrowed suitcase. Everything I now owned could be carried in one hand. The cab ride to David's neighborhood felt like a trip to another planet. Valentine, that's what the suburb was called. Perfect lawns, shiny cars, even the air smelled expensive. David had moved there 4 years ago when he got promoted to regional manager at the insurance company. He and his fiancée, Victoria, had bought a 2-story colonial with white shutters and a red door. I'd seen it only once before. As the taxi pulled into their driveway, I caught my reflection in the window. Smoke-scarred skin, wrinkled clothes, hair still smelling faintly of ash. I almost told the driver to turn around. But where would I go? I told myself this was temporary. Just until the insurance money came through. Just until I could stand on my own 2 feet again. The cab driver helped me unload my little suitcase. As he drove away, I stood there on the edge of that perfect lawn, feeling like an intruder. Then the door opened. "Mom!" David's voice carried that polite warmth people reserve for guests, not for mothers. Still, I smiled. He looked so much like his father, tall, careful with his words, always slightly guarded. Victoria appeared behind him almost instantly. She was younger than David by nearly 10 years, dressed in a white blouse and jeans that probably cost a week of my old grocery budget. Her brown hair was tied back in one of those effortless buns that take effort. "Oh, Grace," she said, smiling with just her mouth. "I can't imagine what you've been through." Her eyes darted toward my suitcase before they came back to me. "Thank you," I whispered, stepping inside. "I'll only stay until I can get back on my feet." David and Victoria exchanged a glance, a silent conversation I wasn't invited into. "Of course," David said. "Let's sit and talk." Their home was beautiful. Too beautiful, everything matched. White sofas, spotless windows, glass coffee tables that looked untouched. The kind of home where laughter felt out of place. I perched on the edge of the couch, afraid to leave a mark. My smoke-scented clothes felt wrong here, like dirt in a museum. Victoria sat beside David, one manicured hand resting on his arm. "So, Mom," he began. "What's the plan?" "The plan?" I blinked. "Well, the insurance money will take a few weeks. Maybe a month. I just need a place to stay until then." Silence. A long one. I saw Victoria's jaw tighten. David cleared his throat. "Mom, Victoria and I, we've been talking. We both work long hours and we really value our privacy. You understand, right? At first I thought I'd misheard. I wouldn't be in your way," I said quickly. "I'll cook, clean. You won't even notice I'm here." Victoria leaned forward slightly, her voice soft, too soft. "It's not about that, Grace. It's about space. This is our first home together. We're still finding our rhythm as a couple." I stared at her. "I'm his mother." "Of course," she said smoothly. "Which is why we thought you might be more comfortable. Somewhere else, somewhere you can have your independence. Independence. Such a pretty word to hide something. Ugly." I looked at my son. My only son. Waiting for him to defend me. Waiting for the boy who used to hold my hand when he crossed the street. He didn't. "Victoria's right," he said quietly. "We think you'd be happier with your own space." The air went out of me. "Happier?" I repeated. "David, I lost everything yesterday. You think I'd be happier alone in a hotel room than with my family?" Victoria's voice turned syrupy again. "There are lovely extended stay places near the mall. They're very clean and safe." My hands trembled. "And how am I supposed to pay for that, Victoria?" "The insurance money hasn't come yet." David shifted, uncomfortable. "I could help with that. A few hundred to get you started." A few hundred, as if I were a charity case. "David," I whispered. "I changed your diapers. I worked double shifts to send you to college. I was there for you every time life broke you. And now you can't give me a couch to sleep on?" His face twisted. But before he could speak, Victoria squeezed his arm tighter. "No one's questioning your history," she said, almost gently. "We just think everyone would be more comfortable with boundaries." Boundaries, that word again. It sounded like a wall. "You're kicking me out," I said flatly. "We're not kicking you out," David protested. "We're just saying this arrangement wouldn't work for anyone." I stood up slowly, my knees cracking under the weight of betrayal. "I understand," I said. "Mom, please don't be like that." "We're trying to do what's best for everyone," I smiled. though my lips trembled. What's best for everyone, David, would be if your mother didn't have to sleep on the street tonight. Victoria's eyes darted away. You don't have to sleep on the street. There are options. I picked up my little suitcase, that single sad piece of my life, and held it close to my chest. You're right, I said softly. There are always options. I turned toward the door. David stood uncertain. I'll call you in a few days, he said. Don't bother, I replied. I wouldn't want to invade your sanctuary. Victoria flinched at the word, but said nothing. When I stepped outside, the air hit me like cold water. I stood on their perfect sidewalk, staring at their perfect house, and realized I was truly, completely alone. Through the window, I saw their silhouettes talking. Probably about me, probably about how dramatic I was being. Let them talk. They hadn't seen what I'd seen. They hadn't lost what I'd lost. They hadn't been abandoned by their own child. I walked until my legs ached. Ended up in front of a small budget motel with flickering neon lights, the kind of place you cross the street to avoid at night. I checked in with what little money I had, the clerk barely looking at me. The room smelled like stale smoke and disinfectant. The bed was hard. The wallpaper was peeling, but it was quiet. I sat on the edge of the mattress, staring at my reflection in the cracked mirror. 65 years old, homeless, unwanted. How does a mother get to this point? I didn't know, but I knew I couldn't stay there forever. Then I remembered. The business card. Yellowed and creased from decades in my wallet. A name I hadn't said out loud in over 40 years. Randall Galloway. That name, Randall Galloway, sat heavy in my mind. I hadn't seen him in 40 years, maybe more. He'd been my late husband Robert's best friend once. The kind of man who came by every Sunday with a six-pack and a story that made everyone laugh. He'd also been the one person who told me the truth about Robert's gambling, about the lies he told to keep up appearances. Randall was rough around the edges, but he'd always had a heart that beat honest. After Robert passed, Randall came to the funeral. He'd stood apart from everyone else, hat in his hands, eyes red. Before leaving, he pressed that small yellow card into my palm and said, "If you ever need help, Grace, or real help, call me." Back then, I never imagined I would. But sitting alone in that motel room, I realized I had no one else. The card had a phone number scribbled across it, almost faded. I didn't even know if it still worked. I hesitated, thumb hovering over the digits as I typed them into the motel's old landline. It rang twice. Then a voice, deep and gravelly. "Hello? Randall?" Silence. Then soft disbelief. "Grace? Grace Coleman?" Lord above, I thought I'd never hear your voice again. My throat tightened. "It's been a long time," I'll say. "What's got you calling me after all these years?" There was no easy way to say it. "My house burned down, Randall. Everything's gone." Another long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. "Where are you now?" "A motel off Highway 7, just trying to figure out my next step." "You stay right there," he said. "Don't move. I'll be there in 20 minutes. Randall, you don't have to." But the line had already gone dead. When the knock came, I almost didn't open the door. It had been so long since someone came for me. He looked older, of course. We both did. But under the gray hair and wrinkles, there was still that same spark in his eyes, that same warmth that could fill a room. "Grace," he said, voice trembling just slightly. "Randall." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stepped forward and wrapped me in a hug that smelled faintly of cedar and old cologne. It had been so long since anyone held me like that. Like I mattered. "I heard about the fire on the radio," he said, pulling back. "Didn't realize it was your house." "Most people didn't," I said. "I didn't think anyone would care." "Well, I do." He looked around the shabby room, his frown deepening. "You can't stay here." "I don't have a choice." "The hell you don't," he said, shaking his head. "Pack your things. You're coming with me, Randall. No arguments. You'll stay in my guest room. I've got more space than I know what to do with." Part of me wanted to protest. to tell him I didn't want to be a burden. But another part, the tired, hollow part, just wanted to feel safe again. So I nodded. He took my suitcase, and for the first time in days, I didn't feel the weight of it. The drive to Randall's house was quiet at first. The night pressed close around us, the headlights cutting through the dark. After a while, he spoke. "I'm sorry about David." I froze. "How did you—" He gave a small shrug. "Word gets around in small towns. Folks talk. Said your boy's doing well for himself. Didn't mention much about you, though." I looked out the window, my reflection ghostly against the glass. He didn't want me staying with him. Randall's grip tightened on the steering wheel. He what? He said it wouldn't be comfortable. For him or his wife. For a moment, I thought Randall might pull over just to curse. "I always knew that boy had a bit of your husband in him," he muttered. Too proud for his own good. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Instead, I watched the dark fields roll by, remembering when those same roads used to lead me home. Randall's house sat on the edge of town, past a grove of old oak trees. It was a simple place, single-story white shutters, a big wraparound porch. Nothing fancy, but it felt alive. When he opened the door, warmth hit me like a blanket. The faint smell of coffee and pine lingered in the air. "Welcome home," he said. Those two words cracked something inside me. He showed me to the guest room, a cozy space with floral curtains, a handmade quilt, and a window that looked out over the trees. "It's not much," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But it's clean, and it's yours." "It's perfect," I whispered. When he left me alone, I sat on the bed, running my hands over the quilt. For the first time in days, my shoulders relaxed. The silence wasn't empty here. It was peaceful. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the window, soft and golden. I woke to the smell of bacon and coffee drifting down the hall. For a moment, I could almost pretend life was normal again. In the kitchen, Randall was already up, wearing an apron that said Grill Sergeant. He looked ridiculous and wonderful. "Morning, sunshine," he said, flipping pancakes. "You take your coffee black or with cream?" "Just black," I said, smiling despite myself. He set a steaming cup in front of me. "Eat. You look like you haven't had a good meal in weeks." I wanted to argue, but the truth was he was right. The first bite of bacon nearly made me cry. After breakfast, I offered to do the dishes, but he waved me off. "You're a guest, Grace. You just sit and relax." I didn't remember the last time someone told me to relax. Over the next few days, a quiet rhythm formed. We'd drink coffee on the porch, talk about the old days, laugh about silly memories from when Robert was still alive. Randall had a way of listening that made you feel seen. He didn't interrupt, didn't judge, just let you talk until the pain came out. Sometimes we'd fall silent and just watch the trees sway. "You ever think about starting over?" he asked one afternoon. "At my age?" I laughed softly. "Start what? A new career?" He smiled. "No, a new life. A new you." I thought about that for a long time. Could I start over? After losing everything, my home, my family, even my faith in people. Could I really begin again? "I don't know if I have it in me," I admitted. "You do," he said simply. "You've always had more fire than you realize." The irony of that word, fire, made us both laugh. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat by the window, writing in a small notebook I'd found in the drawer. It felt good to put thoughts on paper again. Randall walked in quietly. "You look like you're miles away." "Just thinking." He handed me a small box. "Found this in the garage. Thought you might like it." Inside was an old picture frame. The glass was cracked, but behind it was a photograph. Me, Robert, and little David at his 5th birthday. I stared at it, my heart twisting. "Where did you get this?" "Robert gave it to me years ago. Said he didn't have room for it in his office. I figured you'd want it now." Tears filled my eyes. "Thank you, Randall," he smiled. Some memories deserve to be kept alive. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying David's face, the way he'd looked at me when he asked me to leave. I picked up the phone, tempted to call him. Maybe he'd changed his mind. Maybe he regretted what he'd said. But when I dialed his number, it went straight to voicemail. "Hey, it's David. Leave a message." I opened my mouth, but no words came. I hung up instead. Maybe silence was its own kind of answer. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, I began to feel human again. I helped Randall in the garden, cooking dinners, sweeping the porch. We fell into an easy companionship, two people stitched together by time and loss. One afternoon, as we were pruning rose bushes, Randall said something that stopped me cold. "I ran into David last week." I froze. "You, what?" He was at the hardware store. Didn't see me at first. When I said hello, he looked like he'd swallowed a lemon. My stomach tightened. "What did he say?" "He asked if you were still at the motel. When I told him you were staying with me, he looked uncomfortable. Said Victoria wasn't happy about it." "Victoria," I sighed. "Of course." Randall's eyes softened. "Grace, I know it's not my place, but that boy needs a wake-up call." "He's forgotten who raised him." I shook my head. "He's made his choice." But Randall wasn't finished. "You think you're the only one he's turned his back on?" "Folks talk, Grace. That boy's not the saint he pretends to be." I looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" Randall hesitated. "He's been under investigation at work. Something about missing client funds. Nothing proven yet. But where there's smoke..." I felt a chill. "No, David wouldn't he?" Randall said quietly. "You saw what he did to you when things got inconvenient." I didn't want to believe it. But somewhere deep inside, a small, terrible part of me wondered if he was right. That night, as I sat alone in the living room, I stared at that photo again, the one of me, Robert, and little David. I whispered into the dark, "What happened to you, my boy?" The answer came not from the photo, but from the quiet creak of Randall's footsteps in the hallway. He stood in the doorway, silhouetted by lamplight. "You deserve better than what he gave you, Grace. Don't forget that." I nodded slowly, the truth finally sinking in. Maybe losing my house wasn't the end. Maybe it was the start of finally finding myself again. The days at Randall's house began to feel like borrowed sunlight, warm, gentle, and fleeting. There was peace there, yes, but also something else stirring beneath the calm. Every morning, I'd wake up to birdsong and the smell of coffee drifting from the kitchen. Randall always rose before dawn, claiming old habits die hard. Sometimes I'd find him on the porch, reading the newspaper, glasses low on his nose. One morning, he looked up from the paper and said, "You ever notice how time moves different when you're finally at peace?" I smiled faintly. "Feels slower, kinder," he nodded. "That's because you're not fighting it anymore." I thought about that long after he went inside. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't fighting. Not my son's rejection, not the memories of the fire, not even my own regrets. I was just breathing, but peace never stays where trouble can find it. It started with a knock at the door one humid afternoon. Randall was out buying lumber, and I was in the garden trimming hydrangeas. When I opened the door, a man in a brown jacket stood there, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Grace Coleman." "Yes?" "Certified mail." "Sign here, please." I signed without thinking, and he handed me a thick envelope. The return address made my stomach twist. Coleman and Rowe Real Estate Holdings. That was David's company. I opened it slowly, the paper trembling in my hands. Inside was a formal notice, a statement of eviction for the burned property, accompanied by a letter from David's lawyer. "Dear Mrs. Coleman, as executor of your late husband's estate and joint owner of the property at 12 Maple Avenue, we must formally request that you vacate the premises for reconstruction and insurance processing. Failure to comply may result in forfeiture of claim. Forfeiture of claim." I felt dizzy. That property, my home, was the only thing I had left of Robert. And David, my own son, was trying to take it from me. By the time Randall returned, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the papers spread out like a wound. He read them quietly, jaw tightening. "He sent this?" I nodded, "Grace. He's trying to cut you out completely." My throat felt dry. But why? What could he gain? Randall's eyes darkened. "Insurance money. Rebuilding rights. Maybe control." I told you, there's something off about that boy. I didn't want to believe him. But belief doesn't stop the truth from knocking. A week later, I saw David's car pull into the driveway. It was the first time I'd seen him since that night he turned me away. He stepped out, looking polished as ever. Crisp suit, shiny watch, the kind of confidence that money buys. Behind him was Victoria, her face cold as marble. "Mother," he said stiffly, "we need to talk." Randall stood beside me on the porch, arms crossed. "Maybe you should have done that before sending legal papers." David ignored him. "This is family business." Randall didn't budge. "Then you best remember she's family, not your employee." I touched Randall's arm gently. "It's all right. Let me speak to him." He nodded and stepped back, but not far. David followed me inside. He looked around the cozy living room, the quilt, the wooden shelves, the photographs, as if offended by their simplicity. "I didn't want to send that letter," he began, hands in his pockets. "But Victoria and I have obligations." "Legal ones, obligations?" I asked softly. "Or greed?" His jaw tightened. "Mother, this isn't personal. The house was under both our names. The fire changed the value of everything. The insurance company David." I cut him off. "You turned me away when I had nothing. You said your home wasn't comfortable for me, and now you're comfortable enough to steal what's left of mine?" His face hardened. "That's not fair." "No," I said quietly. "It's not." Victoria's voice broke in from the doorway. "Grace, maybe it's best if you let professionals handle this. You've been through a lot." I looked at her, so poised, so distant, and for the first time I saw through the surface. The polished smile, the rehearsed empathy. "I may be old," I said, "but I'm not blind. You think kindness is a costume you put on for church." Her lips thinned. "We're just trying to do what's right." "For who?" I asked. She didn't answer. David glanced at Randall, who was now standing in the hallway, his eyes like steel. "You shouldn't get involved, Randall," David warned. "This isn't your fight." Randall stepped forward. It is when a good woman gets treated like she's disposable. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air felt heavy with old hurt. Finally, David sighed. "We'll be in touch," he said, turning for the door. "Don't bother," I said. "I've already been in touch with someone who remembers what loyalty looks like." He hesitated at that, just for a heartbeat, then left. The truth unfolds that evening. I sat by the fire while Randall made tea. The flames flickered softly, their glow painting the walls gold. "Do you think he's really in trouble?" I asked. Randall nodded slowly. "I called a friend in town," said the firm's under audit. "Missing funds, altered ledgers, all under David's name." My chest tightened. "He could go to jail." "If the rumors are true, he should," Randall said. Then gentler. "But Grace, maybe it's not about punishment. Maybe this is about truth catching up." I thought about that, how truth moves slow, but never stops. Over the next few days, more letters came. Legal jargon, deadlines, requests for signatures. Randall helped me go through everyone. His calm steadiness was an anchor in the storm. He also made a few quiet phone calls. I didn't know who to, but something in his voice told me he was gathering more than comfort. He was gathering proof. The breaking point it was a Friday evening when the storm truly broke. I was in the kitchen when Randall called out, "Grace, you'd better see this." He was watching the local news. The anchor's voice was calm but sharp. "Breaking tonight? Local real estate developer David Coleman is under investigation for alleged embezzlement of over $200,000 in client funds. Sources say financial discrepancies were discovered following an internal audit." My hands flew to my mouth. Randall muted the TV. "I'm sorry, Grace." But I wasn't sure if I felt sorrow or relief. I thought of all the times I'd made excuses for David, how I'd told myself he was just busy or stressed or misunderstood. But the truth had been there all along, hiding behind charm and success. Later that night, my phone buzzed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Mom, I messed up. Can we talk, please?" I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. "Come by tomorrow. I'll be here." He came the next morning alone. No suit this time. Just jeans, a worn t-shirt, and eyes that looked like they hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, his face crumpled. "Mom, I'm so sorry." I stayed silent. He sank into a chair, burying his face in his hands. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen. The company was bleeding money. I just borrowed some, thinking I could fix it before anyone noticed." "Borrowed?" I said quietly. "That's what your father used to call it too. Borrowed until it all fell apart." He looked up, tears streaking his face. "I'm not him. I swear I'm not. But you became him," I whispered. "Not because of the money, but because of the pride." He broke then, sobbing like a child. And despite everything, some part of me still ached to comfort him. I reached across the table and took his hand. "You need to make it right, David. Not for me. For yourself." He nodded, trembling. "I will." Randall stepped into the room quietly, giving me a small nod. A silent question. "You okay?" I nodded back. In the weeks that followed, things moved quickly. David resigned from the company, cooperated with investigators, paid back what he could. But the most shocking part came when a reporter uncovered something else. A separate insurance claim filed in Victoria's name for the Maple Avenue property, fraudulent, signed after the fire. The scandal hit the papers like a thunderclap. And for once, David wasn't the villain. He was the whistleblower. He'd handed over every document Randall had quietly helped him uncover. Victoria was charged with fraud and conspiracy. Her family's name fell from grace overnight. David came by again a few days later, quieter, humbler. "I told them everything," he said. "About the claim. About her. About me." I looked at him for a long time. "You did the right thing," he nodded. "I should have listened to you years ago." I smiled faintly. "You just needed to lose what you thought mattered. To see what really does." He swallowed hard. "Do you think you could ever forgive me?" I touched his cheek gently. "I already did. The day I stopped letting your choices define my peace." That night, Randall and I sat on the porch again. The crickets sang, and the stars blinked above like tiny, forgiving eyes. He handed me a cup of tea. "You did good, Grace." I smiled. "No, we did," he chuckled. "You think this is the end?" "No," I said softly, watching the horizon fade into gold. "This feels like a beginning." The morning after David's confession, the air felt different. The heaviness that had sat on my chest for weeks began to lift, replaced by something softer, something that felt like forgiveness trying to find its place again. I stood by Randall's porch, watching sunlight slip between the trees. The dew glistened on the grass, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't thinking about what I'd lost. I was thinking about what could still be rebuilt. Randall came outside, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "Heard from your boy this morning?" he asked. I nodded. "He's been working with the investigators. Says he's trying to make things right." Randall handed me my cup. "You believe him?" I took a slow sip before answering. "I want to." "That's a start." He smiled faintly. "You've got a good heart, Grace. Most folks would have shut their door and thrown away the key. Maybe I've learned that shutting people out doesn't protect you. It just makes the loneliness louder." We sat in silence for a while, the quiet kind that doesn't need filling. Randall reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. "There's something I need to show you," he said. "Got a call from my friend at the county records office." He spread the paper on the table, tapping a signature at the bottom. "That's Victoria's signature, on an insurance claim she filed after the fire. Only problem is the date's 2 days after the fire department confirmed total loss. She filed for ownership transfer using your husband's old documents. I looked closer, my breath catching. But that means she tried to steal your property under your nose. David might have been blind to it, but she wasn't. She knew exactly what she was doing. The anger that rose in me wasn't fiery. It was cold, precise. The kind that comes when you realize someone tried to bury you twice. What happens now? Randall leaned back. Now? Now we bring it to the authorities. Let the law do what it's supposed to. For years I had been the woman who stayed quiet, who believed patience would fix what pain couldn't. But as I looked at that paper, I knew silence wouldn't save anyone. Not anymore. That afternoon, I called the investigator handling David's case. He listened carefully, then asked if I could come down to the station. When Randall offered to drive me, I didn't refuse. The ride there felt like stepping into another version of myself, one that wasn't afraid to be seen. Inside the station, the investigator, a woman named Agent Morales, greeted us with a firm handshake. She looked through the documents Randall had gathered, her brow furrowing deeper with every page. This matches what we've been piecing together, she said finally. Victoria used her position to file false documents. She even attempted to redirect the insurance payout into a separate account. You've just confirmed the missing link. I didn't know whether to cry or to laugh. For months I'd felt powerless, and yet here I was, watching the scales tip toward truth. A week later I received a call. Victoria had been arrested. Fraud, forgery, obstruction. Her name would appear in every paper in town. I didn't feel joy exactly, just a deep, quiet sense of justice finding its way home. David came by the next evening. He stood on the porch with a bouquet of lilies, his shoulders slumped. I heard you were the one who turned in the papers, he said softly. I should have done it myself. You did what you could, I said. Sometimes life gives us second chances to fix what we broke. He hesitated. They froze my accounts for now. I might lose everything. You won't lose everything, I said. You've still got your soul. Start from there. He looked up at me, his eyes wet. I don't deserve your kindness. I smiled sadly. Maybe not, but you'll need it anyway. He stayed for dinner that night. The three of us sat around Randall's table. Me, David, and the man who had once been my husband's best friend. It was awkward at first, but slowly the tension eased. Randall cracked a joke about his cooking, and David laughed for the first time in weeks. The sound of it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. After dinner, David insisted on washing the dishes. I stood in the doorway, watching him scrub the plates like a boy trying to clean his conscience. When he turned to me, soap bubbles clinging to his fingers, I saw a flicker of humility there, something real. Mom, he said quietly. When Dad died, I thought I had to fill his shoes. Be the man of the house. I thought that meant being strong, successful, untouchable, but I just ended up being him. You don't have to be anyone but yourself, I said. That's all I ever wanted. He nodded, his voice barely a whisper. I'm sorry I forgot how to love you. And just like that, something inside me unclenched. I stepped forward and pulled him into a hug. He stiffened at first, then melted against me. It felt like holding my boy again, the one who used to run barefoot through the yard, bringing me wildflowers in his tiny hands. When he left later that night, the stars were scattered across the sky like tiny promises. Randall stood beside me, his hands tucked into his pockets. You did good, Grace, he said. Real good. I looked up at him. So did you. I couldn't have done any of this without you. He smiled, but his eyes softened in that way that told me he cared more than he'd ever admit. You don't owe me a thing. You just keep standing tall. That's all the thanks I need. In the following weeks, I began to rebuild. Not my house, not yet, but my life. The insurance claim was cleared in my favor. The property was officially transferred back to my name. Randall helped me draw up new plans for the old land, smaller, simpler, but filled with heart. I'll help you rebuild, he said one morning, rolling up the sleeves of his flannel shirt. I still remember how to handle a hammer. I laughed. You sure about that? Last time you tried fixing something, your shed door fell off. He grinned. Guess I'll need a good supervisor then. Day by day, we worked on clearing the lot. The ashes of what used to be my home no longer looked like loss. They looked like soil waiting for something new to grow. Sometimes David came to help, bringing tools and sandwiches, trying to make up for lost years one act of service at a time. We didn't talk much about the past anymore. It hung between us quietly, but without bitterness. Some wounds don't close, they just stop bleeding. One evening, as the sky blazed pink and orange, I stood in what used to be my front yard. The foundation lines were marked again. Randall stood beside me, hands on his hips. "Looks like we're almost ready to start pouring concrete," he said. "It's strange," I murmured. "I used to think home was a place. But now I think it's just the people who refuse to leave you when everything else burns." Randall turned to me with a small smile. "And you've got a few of those now." I nodded, tears filling my eyes. "I guess I do." As the first stars began to appear, I whispered a quiet prayer. Not for wealth, not for the past to return, but for peace. The kind that stays even when the world shifts. Randall reached over and took my hand, rough and warm. We stood there in silence, watching the last light fade. For the first time in a long while, the darkness didn't scare me. I knew the hardest chapters were behind me, and what came next. "That was mine to write," you said. The months that followed felt like slow healing, like spring quietly returning after a long, merciless winter. Every morning began with the smell of sawdust and the rhythm of hammers echoing across the property. My new house was rising from the ashes, quite literally, and with every nail driven into fresh wood, I felt a piece of myself being rebuilt too. Randall kept his word. He was there every day, sleeves rolled up, laughter echoing through the air as he argued with contractors and fussed over blueprints like they were sacred scripture. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me when he thought I wasn't watching. The kind of look that holds gratitude and tenderness all tangled up. I'd pretend not to notice, but in truth, those glances made my heart ache in a way I hadn't felt in years. Soft, not painful. Healing, not hollow. David came by often now, no longer in expensive suits but in jeans and a work shirt. He helped carry lumber, shoveled dirt, and brought sandwiches from the corner deli. Once, when a beam splintered and nearly fell, he jumped in without hesitation to steady it. Randall grinned at him afterward and said, "Guess you got your mother's backbone after all." David laughed shyly, trying to earn it back. It was strange how time could soften what once felt sharp. We never spoke about the fire anymore, or Victoria, or the betrayal that almost tore us apart. Some truths didn't need to be retold, they simply had to be lived through. One evening, after the crew had left, I stood inside the frame of the new house. The walls were still bare, open to the wind, but I could already see it, the warmth, the laughter, the life it would hold. David walked up behind me, holding a small wooden box. "What's that?" I asked. He opened it and revealed a bundle of charred, half-burned wood. "I kept this," he said, "from the old house. I wanted to throw it away, but I couldn't. I thought maybe it belonged here, somewhere inside the new walls. So we never forget what we came through." I felt tears sting my eyes. "That's beautiful, David." "Maybe it's like us," he said softly. "Burned, but not gone." I nodded. "Not gone." We placed that piece of the past inside the frame together, sealing it between two fresh beams before the drywall would cover it for good. It felt symbolic. Pain turned into foundation. Randall joined us later, carrying a small brass plaque he'd had made. "I thought you might want this above the front door," he said. He handed it to me and I read the engraving aloud. "Grace Rebuilt, 2025. I smiled through tears. "You always did know what to say without saying much." He shrugged, embarrassed. "Words ain't hard when they're true." That night, the three of us sat around a small fire pit outside the nearly finished house. The air smelled of pine and new beginnings. Randall poked at the fire while David roasted marshmallows, laughing when one caught flame. I sat back in my chair, watching the sparks rise into the night sky, feeling something I hadn't felt in a very long time, peace that didn't need to be earned. David leaned forward, his voice quiet. "You know, Mom, I thought the worst thing that ever happened to me was losing everything. But maybe it was the best thing. It made me realize what I really had." I reached out and squeezed his hand. "Losing everything doesn't destroy you, son. It just shows you what was never real to begin with." Randall nodded slowly. "Hard lessons build the strongest walls." We all laughed softly at that, and for a moment, the night felt endless, like time itself was pausing to give us one small mercy. When the house was finally complete, I stood on the porch the morning of the move-in, my heart full. The paint still smelled fresh, the windows gleamed, and sunlight poured in through every corner. Inside, the rooms were simple but beautiful. Soft blue curtains, hand-woven rugs, photographs of my husband, my son, and even a new one of the three of us together by the construction site. Randall walked in, carrying a box labeled kitchen. "Well, it's official," he said. "You're home again." "Home," I repeated, tasting the word like honey. "I almost forgot how that sounded," he chuckled. "Can't forget something that's in your bones." David came up behind us, holding a small plant in a clay pot. "For your porch," he said. "Figured something living deserved to be here first." I smiled, placing it by the front steps. "It's perfect." After everyone left that evening, I stayed outside alone, watching the sunset paint the horizon. The breeze carried the faint scent of wildflowers from the field behind the house. I closed my eyes and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks, for the fire that didn't end me, for the people who refused to give up on me, and for the strange mercy of beginnings born from endings. A car pulled up softly on the gravel drive. It was Randall. He stepped out holding a wrapped box. "I know it's late," he said, "but I thought you might want to open this here, in your new place." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photograph, one taken the day we'd finished rebuilding. Me standing in front of the house, David to my left, Randall to my right. Behind us, the new porch gleamed in the sun, and all three of us were smiling. Real smiles, the kind that carry both scars and gratitude. "I wanted you to have a reminder," Randall said, "of what you built, of what you survived." Tears blurred my vision. "You mean what we built." He looked at me for a long moment before saying softly, "You think maybe, after all this, we could build something else too?" "You and me?" For a moment the wind seemed to stop. The words hung between us, tender and uncertain. Then I smiled. "Maybe we already have." He laughed quietly, that deep, familiar laugh that always warmed a room. "Guess I'll take that as a yes." As he turned to leave, I called after him. "Randall?" He looked back. "Stay a while," I said. "There's no rush to go anywhere tonight." He hesitated only a moment before walking back up the porch steps. We sat side by side in the soft glow of the porch light, watching the stars appear one by one. Neither of us spoke much. We didn't have to. The silence was full of everything we'd lived through. Grief, forgiveness, survival, love in its quietest form. Somewhere deep inside, I felt the old ache finally settle into peace. I thought of Robert, of the home we once built, of the son who'd found his way back, of the friend who'd never left my side. Maybe life wasn't about avoiding the fires. It was about learning to rise from them, over and over again. And as the night wrapped around us like a soft blanket, I realized I wasn't afraid of tomorrow anymore. I had lived through the worst and found something better waiting on the other side. Truth, forgiveness, and the kind of love that stays. Because sometimes, justice doesn't come from revenge or courtrooms. Sometimes it's simply the quiet joy of knowing you survived, and the strength to start again.